Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us once again. We've got lots of good stuff to talk about today. The Journal-Sentinel's ongoing investigation into whether the Milwaukee Police Department is massaging the crime numbers in order to make itself look a lot better. We're going to talk about the announcement by President Obama today that we will no longer deport a huge group of illegal immigrants. And we'll talk about the new poll that shows Tommy Thompson has a huge lead over everyone else in the Senate race to replace Herb Kohl. And we will also talk about what's shaping up to be a mediocre season for the Milwaukee Brewers. All right, let me introduce everybody. We have longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. You know Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, we've got to spend the first few minutes talking about the investigation by the newspaper into crime reporting errors by the Milwaukee Police Department, which seem to make Milwaukee look like it has a lot less violent crime than it actually does. The Journal-Sentinel asked for even more records, and the police chief says, okay, sure, but it'll cost you $10,000, and it's going to take us weeks to assemble those numbers. Which side is being unreasonable, Joel? Is it the police? Is it the police department saying, "Okay, you're a big company, you can afford $10,000. If you want us to spend the time, we'll spend the time, but you have to pay for the records"? Or should they just say, "Here you go"?
I really think Chief Flynn is one of the better police chiefs we've had for quite a while. I admire many of the things he's done, but he's absolutely wrong about this. These are public records. The Journal, I know he doesn't like some of the Journal reporters, and you saw like a thing back and forth with him and one of the reporters in a press conference, which I also think the Journal-Sentinel is starting to sort of misrepresent him a little bit. To talk about him storming out, which, you know, he gave the guy an answer and the guy didn't like the answer and he left and said, you know, this isn't getting anywhere. The chief is very, he's got a big ego. He's smart, and he considers himself smarter than most of the people covering it. But this, you know, charging $10,000 for public records is just outrageous. It's not in the spirit of being open with the public. You know, the Journal, no matter what you think of them, and I've had a few criticisms of them myself, the Journal-Sentinel represents the public. You know, they aren't. The reason you report and you do stories should be, you know, these are things that the public deserves to know. And I certainly think in this in this whole issue of, you know, what are the real crime statistics, and you know, was there an organized attempt to, you know, tamp some things down to make the city look better than it really is? That's a legitimate question, and looking at these records is a legitimate thing to do to determine how bad this is. I think every police department minimizes violent crime as much as they can. I don't know that what we're doing here is any different than what a whole lot of other major departments are doing. But the best thing is to be open about it and open your records. Now, you have to point out, and I think I have to point out on the chief's behalf, he's the one who originally said there's something wrong with these numbers. There's something wrong with the computer codifications. He actually asked the FBI to look into it at one point. So I don't think he's necessarily covering things up, but I think it has become personal now between the chief and the newspaper.
Definitely.
And that doesn't serve anybody.
No. What if after this set of records, the newspaper says, now we want you to spend another 6 weeks giving us another set of records?
First of all, it doesn't take 6 weeks to come up with a record.
I don't know how long it will take. I mean, I really don't know. And I almost always agree with everything Joel says. But this is one exception. The Open Records Law gives the ability for organizations, public institutions, whose records are being requested, it gives them the right to develop a reasonable cost structure for the news organization or the individual who wants them to get those records. And I think that is what they have done. As a taxpayer in the city of Milwaukee, and probably one of the few people who still, you know, own some Journal stock, I don't want my tax dollars to go to provide this information for free for the Journal when it means somewhere, someplace, somebody in that police department is doing that job instead of the job the taxpayers pay. And the Journal is an organization that, quite frankly, makes enough money to give big bonuses to its top executives. It ought to be able to cough up $10,000 for these records that it says, and I would agree, are critical to having the public having a better understanding of this. But, they ought to pay for it. They shouldn't expect that public employees will be doing this work, in essence, for free, and that taxpayers will pay for it.
$10,000 is a lot to you and me. Is it a lot to the Journal?
Well, I would think it probably is, given how they've treated the salaries of some of their employees. But the open records law is not up for negotiation. You don't sit down at the table and go, well, we'll give you this if you give us that, and back and forth. I think the Journal Sentinel, being the watchdog that it is and should be, is absolutely right to aggressively pursue this story that we've talked about in the past, and I think doesn't pass the smell test. I've had officers tell me for a couple of years now that this has been going on, and if the books are being cooked, that's just outrageous. But the chief is right to say, this takes a certain amount of time. Probably not to hand over the records, but to go through them and redact things that need to be taken out. That will take
sexual assault cases in there. They have to.
They have to do that. But this chief is obsessed with numbers and records, and by him stonewalling, it appears to a lot of people that he's got something to hide. He's always quick to run to the Journal Sentinel and TV cameras when he has favorable numbers. Well, hand over these records and let the Journal Sentinel pursue this story.
Should he hand them over?
Yes, because I think the public's confidence in his ability to lead the organization is now starting to be questioned. They're starting to question his integrity, or at least his wisdom, in wanting to pick this battle with the Journal. In the whole scheme of things, $10,000 isn't that much to either organization. But I think it's escalated to the point where no one is understanding whether 10,000 is a fair number from the chief or a fair number for the Journal. And as a result, to put that to bed, just go ahead and provide them with the information after the officers have done what they need to do in order to make it usable by the Journal.
All right, next topic. So President Obama announced today he's just going to sidestep Congress and order government agencies to no longer go after young illegal immigrants who came here as kids and have maintained clean records. Is this a good move aimed at putting good people to work, or is it simply encouraging more people to come here illegally, Kevin?
Well, I don't like it. On the surface, it probably is appealing to some, but I think it's a jobs program for illegal immigrants during a time when millions of Americans are unemployed. I think that's unconscionable. I think the better approach would be to send the right message to people who are here trying to become citizens that that's the route to go. If you're in your 20s and have been here since you were an infant and still aren't a citizen, to me there's something wrong there. But let's say that you like the policy. Let's say that you like this DREAM Act policy that is very akin to what Marco Rubio has been trying to push to the United States Senate, and that was ridiculed by the left. It's very similar. You don't use a brazen power grab that might be illegal that circumvents Congress. There's a law, and the president is basically thumbing his nose at the law, and that's not the way to go. This is very transparent. He's trying to shore up a very important voting bloc at a time when he doesn't want people talking about his record, especially on the economy. So he changes the subject. He knows that the Supreme Court ruling is coming up on Obamacare. He doesn't want you talking about that. He's throwing this out there, so this is the story for the next couple of days.
Romney said, I don't like this. That's just letting people cut in line instead of going through the entire process.
Well, the bigger issue that I have is the overreach by the president in deciding what laws he wants to enforce or not enforce. And it doesn't get to the problem of fixing the overall U.S. immigration policy.
Not at all.
And
makes
he hasn't said that it has.
Well,
he has not said that it
there's
has.
a whole lot that hasn't been said and a whole lot that still needs to be said, and Congress has the legitimate right to weigh in on it, and that's what the president has attempted to circumvent. It is an election year. It makes you cynical as to what his motives are. The timing of it certainly makes you even more suspect of his reasons for wanting to tackle this piece at this time this way.
He's been under fire by the Latinos because his administration was bragging about the fact that last year they kicked out 400,000 illegal immigrants. Right. Now he's done a complete flip-flop.
He has deported a lot of people.
He has deported more people than have ever been deported in history. And I think that's a tragedy, frankly. And if this is political, I'd say thank God for political. It's sort of like saying, well, he came out for gay marriage just because it's popular. He came out, for allowing these young people to stay in this country because it's popular, because it's also right. These stories, the individual stories frequently, are just tragic. They're children who grew up in this country, went to school, graduated, some with honors, and many of them didn't know until they graduated from high school they were even in this country undocumented because their parents had brought them here at such a young age, brought them here in arms as babies. They had no idea they weren't citizens of the United States. And then the time they find out is when they apply for scholarships or want to apply for scholarships or want to go to college and suddenly find out, they're not citizens of this country. And not only that, they're threatened.
Well, that can be rectified.
They're threatened to be no, as a matter of fact, it can. And the Republicans have made it impossible. The truth of the matter is, these kids now are facing deportation to countries they've never lived in. Many of them don't even speak Spanish. There may be family members of theirs that do, but they don't necessarily.
So do you forgive them for their parents' mistake?
You certainly don't punish them.
You don't punish them. And, I think that what Joel has said is right. This is an issue about what the right thing is to do. Because
following the law would be number one.
Well, this is the interesting thing. This is not an issue that involves the need for a law to be passed by Congress. This is an administrative. No, it is not. It is not.
Besides that, Congress won't pass a law.
It is an administrative
become a dictator in the White House.
It is an administrative policy that the president is within his full rights to change.
If he follows the law.
He is within his full rights to change. And I'm amazed that you all are suddenly worried now about the will of Congress, when in fact,
there's a process.
But when in fact, Vice President Cheney, not too many years ago, said the will of Congress was not his concern. What the president is doing is something that is absolutely necessary and right. We're not talking about amnesty. We're not talking about a wholesale, even Republicans have said, including Marco Rubio, that this is not about amnesty.
We're not even talking about applying for citizenship.
It's taking young people between a very specific age. They could not have entered this country when they were any older than 16 years old. They can't be any older than 30 now. They have to be students. They have to be clean in terms of any serious felonies or violations of the law. We're talking about young men and young women who are veterans who would fall under this category. These are the young people who, if you took away the term undocumented workers or illegal immigrants, these are the kinds of young people we would want to have in this country doing what they're doing, defending the rights of all of us to stand here and disagree about whether or not they should be in this country.
And that's
the law says now
nicey, but some of them are not Boy Scouts.
No, and those are ones who will not be eligible.
The law says now they go back when apprehended. The president has made a unit. They go back to their country of origin. If their parents brought them in here illegally, had them here illegally, they go back.
You would send a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old who doesn't speak Spanish.
That's not the real issue. The president has unilaterally decided that he's not going to enforce an aspect of the law that he is constitutionally required to enforce.
And Congress refuses to give these people access to citizenship.
Well, that's the avenue you have to go through, Joel.
There is no avenue.
If only Congress would do it.
Next topic. How about the new Rasmussen poll out that shows Tommy Thompson is the guy to beat in the Senate race to replace Herb Kohl? It shows Thompson with a huge 52-36 margin in a head-to-head matchup with Democrat Tammy Baldwin. Some people had counted Thompson out of this one. It looks now like they were wrong.
And it makes for a lot of happy people in the Thompson camp, me included. it's outside the margin of error by a whole lot. So there's some cause for excitement for those who support Thompson for Senate. I do think that this race, too, is really going to come down, given the number of candidates that are in the Republican primary. It's going to come down who can turn out their supporters on that day. And to be perfectly honest, no matter how much money Hovde spends to get his name recognition up, that doesn't necessarily translate into a ground game. Newman probably has a very strong organization, especially in some key Republican areas.
And money.
And he has some money if he decides to put some more of his money into it. And he's got some strong Tea Party backing. But that makes him a formidable candidate. Well, and his numbers
campaigned in the past.
His numbers aren't that much different than Hovde's numbers are, so they're hanging down in the same neck of the woods, and they are, both Newman and Hovde are above Fitzgerald. So it really does come down to who can get their people out, their supporters out in August to support their candidate, and I think that's where all these Republican candidates are going to put their effort. It's comforting to Thompson, but he still knows he's got to.
You don't need that kind of name recognition, though.
Well, but there are ways that you can. I mean, I'm thinking of a strong parallel here, perhaps, with Dick Lugar in Indiana, someone who had very strong name recognition, who was well known in Republican circles, but who some Republicans felt had really was no longer as relevant as they wanted him to be. And I mean, particularly those people who are on the extreme right within the Tea Party. So I think I wouldn't be, I'm sure that the Thompson camp is happy, but I'm sure they're also not sitting back and saying, we don't have to worry about anything.
You're right.
There are two candidates that are going to be in this primary race, Newman and Huffey, who have a lot of money. They have a lot of money, and I think what we're going to see, as closer we get to the primary, there are going to be a lot of negative ads about Governor Thompson and his record. And I think that this is going to be a really close primary race. And you know, part of the problem is what people are working off of now is name recognition. It's really too early for people to be paying too much attention to the details of what candidates are talking about, and this, I believe, is going to be a very expensive.
I don't think that it's too early at all. This race has not gotten a lot of attention because all of the focus was on the recall. Now we wake up, the recall is over, and in about 60 days, we're going to go to the primary.
Right.
That's not a lot of time. And yes, because Tommy Thompson appears to be the clear front runner, I would think, given the way that Mark Newman has behaved in the past, they're going to go full out at Tommy and say he's past his prime, he's served his time. We want a younger gun with new, fresher ideas.
And they'll point to some moderate things that he did and say that that's not acceptable.
That's a possibility, especially in a primary. But Tommy is well known. He had a great record, was extremely popular, and is still very likable today.
And Walker said he was going to stay out of this primary.
Well,
he will.
Yeah, because he doesn't support anybody but himself. But the truth of the matter is, and I've said this from the start about Tommy, even when he was jumped out in the lead in the beginning, it is all name recognition, and the extremists who have taken over the Republican Party right now don't like Tommy Thompson. They run ads against him before there were even any other candidates out there. And those are the people in control of the Republican Party now. Rasmussen polls, I don't know anybody who believes Rasmussen polls.
They were right on the Walker Barrett. They were dead on.
I don't know anyone who believes them. But Tommy Thompson, even to run as a Republican these days, has to deny any good thing he's ever done. Has to deny supporting health care.
Not do that.
Has to deny supporting stem cell research.
It
is an embarrassment to the Republican Party, and truthfully, I think Kevin, on this one point is right. No one is paying attention to this race so far because of the recalls. But when they start paying attention, the strong candidate is going to be Tammy Baldwin.
Well, and if you're going to throw the E word around, extreme, certainly Tammy Baldwin, when you open the dictionary and look at extreme, there's her face.
No,
She is so far to the left.
So untrue.
She's wow.
So untrue.
Thompson
So
hasn't
untrue.
denied his record in healthcare. He has not.
He has. I just saw the ad.
He has not. He has not denied his record. If anything, he's reminded people of his leadership in those areas around healthcare, stem cell research, which he certainly was a strong backer of, and even more recently, school choice welfare reform. Those are the areas that I think people had appreciated his leadership on in the past and will reward him for going forward because he's still a man of great ideas.
All right. Now, I know you're all baseball fans, so, well, everybody, but Denise, who just likes football.
I miss Prince Fielder, though. I miss him.
The Milwaukee Brewers, we're going to talk about them just for a few minutes. There's 63 games into a 162-game season. Their record as of right now is 28 wins, 34 losses, good enough for only fourth place in their division. Is there still any reason to be optimistic, or is it way too early to write this year off? Can it all turn around?
This team has been decimated.
It turned around for St. Louis. It turned around for St. Louis.
Decimated by injuries. They lost a third of their team to injuries. They still have terrific starting pitching, so that's great to watch sometimes. Right now, they're having trouble with even their great closer, and they've got one of the best closers in baseball. And
Makes you nervous now.
He's blown a couple saves. This is baseball. First of all, it's amazing that the fact they played very, very unevenly and they've lost so many great people. John Lucroy was going to be a all-star, and he broke his hand through strange circumstances. It is. They've been hit by all this bad luck, but there's still some great parts of that team. And they weren't that far before they got swept. Three games. They were only 3 or 4 games out of first place.
Denise is right, though. They do miss Fielder.
Well, and they don't have that power anymore. You need to replace greatness with greatness, and they replaced a great player with nothing. And this
they replaced him with some things that got injured.
Well, this is a bad baseball team. I think the season is done. It's over. I don't see them going anywhere. It's not all their fault, especially when your baseball team is in a mash unit all the time. That's not their fault. When teams lose great players, several of them, it's hard. But the management is to blame here, I think, because they saw that Fielder was going to leave. They did not put in place the pieces that could be there this year for just what is happening. They have no power. They have no key clutch hitting, and the pitching, which we said had to be stronger than strong when the season started, is inconsistent.
You can't use the complaint that he's not pumping the money into the payroll because it's a $100 million payroll now.
He's done that much. The public asked for significant contribution on the part of the owners in investing in the team. They did that. This year, the disappointment to me has been around the closing pitchers. I watched the game night before last where the Brewers had the lead, 2 outs. Axford just collapsed.
And normally
last
when you
night,
get to
they
the
did
inning,
the same
this team
thing.
is unbeatable.
Exactly. They get that far, their closers will get them over the hump. So what could have been 2 games won down in Kansas City ended up being a sweep for Kansas City. Exactly.
But you're losing to really mediocre teams. Wait till they play the really good teams on their schedule. I'm very worried about that.
All right, we shift gears a little bit, a little more politics now. The national spotlight has finally moved off Wisconsin, at least for a little while. The latest focus seems to be on a state much more accustomed to the spotlight. Either place, though, the object is to make sure your side gets more votes. Or is it to make sure the other side gets fewer votes? Here's Rick Horowitz to explain.
You know how certain people can seem perfectly reasonable when you first meet them? It's the same way with words. Perfectly reasonable too, until you dig a little deeper and then you say, wait a minute. Welcome to Florida, virtual Florida. This is Florida's governor. His name is Rick Scott. You noticed how many Republican governors these days are named either Rick or Scott? This guy's got both. Anyway, Rick Scott is trying to kick thousands of people off Florida's voter rolls before Election Day. And this is one of Florida's senators. His name is Marco Rubio, also a Republican. and he's trying to defend what his governor's up to. Now, what his governor says he's up to is getting rid of illegal voters who shouldn't be on the rolls. What lots of other people think he's up to, what lots of Republican governors are up to this year, is making it harder for the kind of people who tend to vote for Democrats, students, poor people, racial and ethnic minorities, to actually vote. In Florida, meanwhile, election officials from both parties say that Rick Scott's voter purge lists are chock full of errors. Perfectly eligible voters would be knocked out too. So then the question is, how do you balance things? How do you justify going after illegal voters but purging legal voters? Here's Marco Rubio's try on Wednesday. I don't think, he says, in order not to kick off a single legal voter, we have to somehow tolerate the existence of 100, 200, or even 5 illegal voters. I just don't think that's a valid choice. Sounds perfectly reasonable at first, doesn't it? I mean, if the price of getting rid of 100, let alone 200 illegal voters is maybe you'll also lose 1 legal voter, well, that might be an acceptable price to pay. But then he slips in, or even 5 illegal voters. Now that's a much closer call, don't you think? But it gets worse, because what if the balance actually goes the other way? What if in trying to get even 1 illegal voter off the rolls, you wind up knocking out 5 legal voters? Not so good, right? And what if it's 100 legal voters? What if it's 200 or 1,000? Well, that's a terrible trade-off, isn't it? Unless, of course, you're not really going after illegal voters in the first place. Unless that's just your cover story.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of what looks to be another beautiful weekend.